Alright, now we're on to Mage, which definitely needs some help coming out of Rosticon's Rumble. It was already not a great class, and it's losing Baku, Frostless Jaina, and Aluneth all to the rotation, which pretty much completely destroys every viable deck the class has had for the past year. So hopefully they get some good stuff. First up is probably not a good stuff, Messenger Raven. So 3 mana 3/2 discover a Mage minion. I want to compare this to Cabal Courier. It was a 3 mana 2/2 discover a Mage, Priest, or Warlock card. And I think that card was probably better than this, because you can get spells. And in general, especially for Mage, I think I'd rather have a spell than a minion in almost every case. And Cabal Courier was a card that saw very little play. It saw play in like Reno decks, because you had to have 30 different cards, but it was like the worst card in that deck. So I think this compares unfavorably to that, and that wasn't a great card, so bad start for the Messenger Raven. Mage minions are okay though. You can always get like Water Elemental or Sorcerer's Apprentice or something, or Antonidas if you have the time for that card. But generally I don't think getting a random Mage minion, or a semi-random Mage minion, is really all that useful to most Mage decks. Like, I don't think you're going to play this in aggro Mage, because after turn 3, you're looking to start casting like Fireball at your opponent's face and stuff like that. Not really trying to discover like a 5 mana 5/5 Bonfire Elemental that you probably can't activate or something like that. And in a control Mage deck, I mean, surely there's got to be something better than just discovering some random mid-range minion. So I'm not really too excited for this card. Just seems sort of underpowered. But if there's a Mage deck that has some sort of serious restriction on the cards you can play, like I mentioned Cabal Courier and Reno Mage earlier, I think maybe a Spiteful Summoner deck would have looked at this card. Maybe Odd Mage would have been interested in this card. But as far as I'm aware, none of that stuff really exists in Standard anymore, so I don't see much of a home for this card. The only thing I could think of is maybe the Book of Specters deck. I believe that card is still in Standard. If there's a Book of Specters deck, maybe it could play this card. But that has traditionally not been a great deck, and I think even in that deck it's a bit of a stretch to play this. Next up we have Magic Dart Frog. So you want to compare this to Flamewaker. It's a little bit cheaper, but it has less stats, and probably a much less powerful effect. You're only shooting one minion, or one missile rather, instead of two, and it can only target minions. It's kind of debatable whether or not an effect like this only targeting minions is better. Like on Knife Juggler, you would probably rather Knife Juggler only be able to target minions, because the decks that play it are looking more for board control, things like Zoo and stuff like that. But one of the big strengths of Flamewaker was that it could go face, because it turns your arcane missiles into like 5 damage instead of 3 or whatever. And, you know, Mage likes to fireball their opponent, so they like for them to have less health. So I'm going to say not being able to smork is definitely a bad thing for this card. But it does of course have a lot of synergy in Mage. Sorcerer's Apprentice can make this card do some pretty nutty stuff. It can combo well with Shooting Star or Arcane Missiles to kill an opponent's board. We got a new 1 mana twin spell card, Ray of Frost, which lets you double dip on the effect of this card for a pretty low mana cost. But like I said, I don't think Tempo Mage or Aggro Mage, whatever you want to call it, really has that much of a use for this kind of card. I mean, it's a 2 mana 1/3. Like, let's not gloss over this being a 2 mana 1/3. If you're looking for a 2 mana 1/3, like maybe you'd rather even play Mana Worm than this card, and we know that card's pretty unplayable now. But yeah, it doesn't even seem great in the archetype, and I don't really personally have that much faith in Aggro Mage going forward. Next up we have Ray of Frost. I referenced this card with the Magic Dart Frog, 1 mana twin spell thing. And as a 1 mana twin spell thing, I don't think the Frog is going to see play, but it does have some pretty good synergy with Sorcerer's Apprentice, because you get to cast both halves for 2, or for 0 instead of 2. But even with that synergy, I'm still not super interested in playing this card, I don't think. You can't go face with it at all, so you're either just freezing 2 minions, which typically things that just freeze have not been very powerful in the past. Or you can just target the same minion and 2 mana deal 2 damage to it, which is, worse than Frostbolt. And it can't go face, so it's much worse than Frostbolt. I guess that's like okay if you're playing it with Sorcerer's Apprentice, because it's 0 mana to deal 2 to a minion and freeze it. But Breath of Cindergosa was never a playable card, and that was also 0 mana with Sorcerer's Apprentice, or even just 1 mana without it. And like I said with the Magic Dart Frog, I don't have too much faith in Aggro Mage going forward. But if there is an Aggro Mage, this thing does have some pretty good synergies. I think the deck probably has to play Antonidas again, with the loss of Aluneth. And it does have some pretty good synergy with like maybe Vexcrow is in that deck, has some synergy with Mana Cyclone. So if there is an Aggro Mage, I could see playing this card as like, you sort of have to play it just because there's a minimum threshold for how much synergy you have. But the card itself I don't actually think is very good. Next up we have Conjurer's Calling. So I guess the thing to note about this is you can destroy a minion on either side of the board. But if you destroy your opponent's minion, you're going to be replacing it with 2 more minions, which seems really inefficient, like almost never worth doing. But I guess if your opponent has like a Silverhand Recruit that they've cast, double Blessing of Kings and a Sound the Bells on or something, it can be worth Conjurer's Calling that. But in general, I think you're looking to target your own stuff with this. So the best target for this probably would have been Corridor Creeper, but that's rotating out of Standard. And in general, I don't really think there's too many good targets left for this. Like Chain Gang is rotating, that would have been a decent thing. The only card I could really think of that I was like super excited to cast this on was like Former Champ. You get 2 5-drops plus the 5/5, which seemed okay. But really, it doesn't seem... Like, I don't know why I'm putting this card in my deck. I don't think there's enough payoff for it. Obviously, it's sort of designed to be played with Khadgar, one of the new legendaries. But I personally don't have that much faith in Khadgar. And I built a Khadgar deck that still didn't want to play this card. So it just seems very unexciting to me. Next up we have Magic Trick. 1 mana, discover a spell that costs 3 or less. So this card seems pretty bad to me. Compare it to like Raven Idol or Hallucination. But those cards were played, like they weren't even always played, they were occasionally played. And part of the reason they were good is because you could play them early game and discover something cheap, or play them late game and discover something big and impactful. And since this is capped at cards that cost 3 or less, you're never getting something big and impactful. So just all around, I think it's a very low impact card. But of course, Mage does have some very powerful spell synergy. Sorcerer's Apprentice, maybe Magic Dart Frog, Mana Cyclone, Antonidas. Like there's reasons you would want to play a 1-mana spell in a Mage deck. And since this is capped at 3, there's a very good chance it gives you another 1-mana spell in your Mage deck. But I was already not that excited to be playing Ray of Frost in any of my Mage decks, and that's a 1-mana that guarantees a 1-mana, and this card just seems, even compared to that, this card seems pretty unexciting. Sick art though. Sick art. Next up we have Kirin Tor Tricaster. So this is actually a pretty interesting card, because 3 spell damage is a lot. I mean, for 2 more spell damage, people build decks around a 9-mana 4/12. And in the past, Evolved Kobold, which was a 4-mana 2/2, that card saw play. And man, that was a really terrible card. But compared to the other big spell damage things that have seen play, it's really hard to cast multiple spells with this, unless you're like pairing it with a Sorcerer's Apprentice or something. But like your Arcane Missiles is going to cost 2. Your Shooting Star is going to cost 2. It's like... The drawback on this is so huge if you want to be casting more than 1 spell. But even if you're only casting 1 spell, the drawback on this is pretty significant. Like, it's 4 mana that makes your stuff cost 1 more, so you can't even pair it with Blizzard, because that becomes an 11 mana combo. It is still pretty good with Shooting Star, 2 mana deal 4 to 3 things. But outside of Shooting Star, I'm not really seeing any super powerful synergies. And in any place where I would want to play this card, it's kind of hard for me to imagine that I would want to play this instead of Cosmic Anomaly. Cosmic Anomaly is the same cost, better stats, and no drawback for 1 less spell damage. So I think Cosmic Anomaly is just better, most of the time at least, and I don't know of a place where I would want to play this on top of Cosmic Anomaly. So I'm going to give it 2 stars. I even built a spell damage synergy mage deck that plays like Arcane Watcher and Spellbook Binder, a couple neutral cards that benefit from spell damage. And even in that deck, I was not excited to play this card. So I don't think this card is going to see any play, but it's definitely not a card you can totally write off because +3 spell damage is a lot of potential damage. Mana Cyclone, so we're 7 cards in and Mage finally got a good card. We can compare this to the Shaman card Menacing Nimbus, which is a 2-mana 2/2 elemental that always draws a card. This is a 2-mana 2/2 elemental that situationally draws a card, but can draw, I guess, like 10 cards if you really get the nut turn. But compared to Menacing Nimbus, I don't think the elemental synergy is going to be that impactful on this card. Elementals have typically not been great in Mage, although maybe with the rotation of a ton of powerful cards, maybe now is the time for Arcanosaur and Scorch to shine. But if you're playing that kind of elemental deck, it seems like generally you're more focused on minions than spells, so the synergy out of this card may not even fit that deck that well. But one synergy card for elementals that works really well with this card is Elemental Evocation. So you can discount this by 2 mana, which of course makes it 0 mana. So it's a 0 mana 2/2. It's immediately drawing at least 1 card because of the evocation, but it's a 0 mana 2/2 that you can slot into like a 3 mana turn where you're casting 3 other spells, and you can get a ton of value out of the card like that, which does seem very powerful. Also, in the past, people have tried to play Elemental Aggro Mage, which is where I think this would see play, is in an Aggro Mage deck. People have tried to play that, but there just weren't enough playable elementals to make Elemental Evocation not feel ridiculous in the deck. But now you have this thing. You can play 2 of it plus 2 Cosmic Anomaly. That's already 4 elementals that are just naturally in the deck. So you're already getting pretty close to being able to play Elemental Evocation. And then you really just need to play like 1 or 2 water elementals, or like Azurite Elemental is a new one that could be like maybe sort of playable in that deck. So in the past you kind of had to force like 3 to 4 elementals into the deck, and now you only have to force like 1 to 2 into the deck. So Elemental Aggro Mage, because of this card and Evocation, could be a thing. I've said it a couple of times already. I don't really expect Aggro Mage to be that good in this expansion, but I'm going to give this 4 stars because I think if Aggro Mage is good, it's probably at least in significant part due to this card. I think this card could be enough to make Aggro Mage playable, and I think making Aggro Mage playable might be the same as making Mage playable in this expansion. So that's why this guy's getting 4 stars, even though, to be completely honest, I really don't have all that much faith in it. Next up we have Power of Creation. I guess this would be the hope for a non-aggro mage deck, but to be honest, I really don't see it. 6 cost minions kinda suck. As an example, when I was talking about Mana Cyclone, I mentioned Arcanosaur. That would be a really terrible thing to get with this card. But even if you get some of the better ones, like you get a couple Boulder Fist Ogres off this or something, there's still a lot of classes that can deal with this pretty efficiently. Like Warrior can just super collide that and mostly deal with it. There's like Equality and Shrink Ray, Mass Hysteria. Just a lot of classes that can deal with that kind of stuff. There is like the super high rolls off this card. Kirin Bloodhoof's very good. Damage Stegatron is pretty insane with this card. But I think there's a pretty good number of 6-drops. I didn't actually count, but I don't see it being super reliable to get like insane value out of this card. We had the Paladin card, a new Challenger, which discovered a 6-cost minion, and it was not very good. So I'm pretty confident that 6-drops aren't that good, but I mean, there is a big rotation. I admit I didn't actually go through and see which 6-drops are rotating, so like maybe all of the terrible 6-drops are rotating, and this card could be better. But like even if this card is good, it's still super slow. Like, turn 8, your opponent's going to have the answer by turn 8. Whether that answer is Super Collider or Kill Command your face, they're going to have their answer by turn 8 most of the time. But even if it's good, like even if it's good value on average, even if it's not too slow, where exactly are you playing this card? In the past, control mages have typically not been about playing a bunch of big idiots that your opponent can't remove. They've been about like running the opponent out of resources or whatever. And this card wouldn't really fit in that deck. Of course, that's not to say that Control Mage going forward can't do that, but I don't think there has been a deck. I don't think there's been a Mage deck in the past, like, 5 years or whatever that would have played this card. Except maybe, like, Spiteful Mage, that could have been sick. But yeah, I don't really see a home for this card. It's gonna be sick to see people get Reckless Rocketeer off this and smork the opponent, though. Next up we have Khadgar. So, like, this is obviously the reason that Power of Creation, and to a lesser extent Conjurer's Calling were printed, right? So you can double dip on their effects and get a ton of minions. And Mage does have a couple other pretty good minion generators. There's Astromancer and Jan'alai, both of which you'd be pretty happy to hit with this. And in those cases where you hit any of those, maybe not Conjurer's Calling, but the other three, Khadgar is providing you some pretty insane value. But the thing about the value this card gives you is, it's overkill on value, right? So imagine the Power of Creation combo, which is obviously like the most direct thing they're trying to get you to do with this. So imagine the world where you play Khadgar and Power of Creation, and you get 4 copies of Boulder Fist Ogre. So obviously your opponent has to cast Equality, Shrink Ray, Brawl, whatever. They have to do whatever to kill 4 Boulder Fist Ogres and a 2/2. But imagine the world where you play some other 2-drop other than Khadgar, like an Ooze and you kill their True Silver Champion or whatever, and then play Power of Creation and get 2 Boulder Fist Ogres. They pretty much still have to deal with that board. Like, they're still going to cast Shrink Ray on double Boulder Fist Ogre, just like they would have on 4 Boulder Fist Ogres. So, I feel like a lot of the time, even though objectively you get a lot of value out of this card, in practice, you're not actually getting value from that value, if that makes sense. Now, I mean, this card is still very efficient. There's no denying that. And if you're up against, like, Druid or something, the extra Boulder Fist Ogres are going to be pretty insane. But it's still a 10-mana combo. There aren't that many Mage cards that generate minions. And, again, I'm still not really sure what the deck that would even play this combo looks like. So, it's certainly a powerful effect, but I don't expect it to be, competitive. So, finally for Mage, we have Kalecgos. This guy's pretty cool. You play him for 10 mana, and then you can still cast your Flame Strike in the same turn or whatever. That's generally like the criteria for a 10 mana card to be playable. You have to be able to get it down without just dying the next turn. And when you can cast a 0 mana Flame Strike, I think Kalecgos achieves that. Or even if their board is out of Flame Strike range, you can always just play Blizzard or whatever. And even if you don't already have the board clear in your hand, this guy discovers a spell, so you can just discover Blizzard, Flame Strike, maybe a Frost Nova or Cone of Cold or something if you're desperate. And this isn't just a battle cry thing, right? Like every turn your first spell costs 0, so you can keep getting value out of it. It's a continuous threat. Every turn you get the Flame Strike for 0 or whatever if you have it. But you do still have to actually get to 10 mana, which isn't always easy. And for the continuous threat to be applicable, you have to have a spell worth casting every turn. Which, even if you have a handful of Flame Strikes and Blizzards, you don't need to play that every turn. So the continuous effect is like sort of, like it's good, but it's not insane. I mean, if you're just getting a 0 mana Arcane Intellect, or Frostbolt or something, that's pretty good, but you paid 10 mana for this card, so I think in general you probably need to be getting more than that out of it. But it's still a powerful card, and I think one of the most powerful synergies with this card is Luna's Pocket Galaxy. So Luna's Pocket Galaxy and Kalecgos, like whichever order you play them in, it's good. You can Kalecgos first and then cast Pocket Galaxy for 0, Like, the big drawback of Pocket Galaxy is it's hard to find 7 mana to actually play it. But also, if you do spend 7 mana on Pocket Galaxy, it makes your Kalecgos cost 1. And when your Kalecgos costs 1, then like anytime you want to play Flame Strike, it's just a straight up 6 mana discount, where you're also getting a 1 mana 4/12, which is pretty insane. So with Luna's Pocket Galaxy, or also they printed Geppetto in this set for some reason, this card is really good with either of those. Now, I do have kind of the same issue with this as a lot of the other Mage cards. I'm not actually sure where you're playing this, because obviously you're not playing it in Aggro Mage. I personally haven't been... Like, I don't know what the hell Control Mage is supposed to do in this set. I don't know how it actually wins the game, even if Kalecgos seems like a very powerful card. But I'm gonna give this sort of an optimistic 4 stars anyway, because I think if there is any sort of non-Aggro Mage deck, this card is going to be a key player in that deck. And it might even be the sort of card that just like pushes some sort of like combo Freeze Mage with Pocket Galaxy, Geppetto, Malygos, Alexstrasza. It might be the sort of card that can push that deck over the edge. So I think there's a very good chance that this card makes Mage playable. Although, if I'm being totally honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Mage was just straight up unplayable in this set. I attempted to build a Control Mage. It looked like complete garbage. It had the Khadgar Power of Creation thing in it. Looked pretty bad to me. I built a couple Aggro Mage decks. They didn't look great to me, but I think Aggro Mage is probably the best hope that the deck, or that the class has. And there's also the potential of the like Freeze Mage thing I just mentioned with Kalecgos. Again, I don't really think it looks that good. I'm not like really expecting Mage to be like the best class in this expansion by any stretch. But hey, Kalecgos and Mana Cyclone, those are good Hearthstone cards.